Good afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you are watching the Muddy Waters podcast. I did it again. The Muddy Waters podcast exists to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on in our state. We call it the Muddy Waters podcast because the waters of the political environment in our world, in our state, are muddy. It's complicated, hard to understand. And so we try to help cut through that through bringing on different people who have different stories to tell about what's actually going on in our state so that we're better informed, and we can be encouraged as well by other things that people are doing and hearing people's stories. And so again, today we are fortunate to have with us Catherine Parker, who, if you've watched some of our other episodes, other members of her family have been on. So Christina Parker is the we don't need it has been on, as well as your mom. So political family here, I think, political dynasty, a Maine's political dynasty, I think, is what's going on. So thank you for joining us, Catherine, or Kate. Is it Kate or Catherine or Kathy?
Either or, Kate or Catherine. It depends on who you're talking to.
Okay, no Kathy though.
No Kathy.
Okay, okay.
Unless you're my mechanic, apparently.
Okay. Well, I am not. One thing you don't want me to do is fix your car. I can help you calculate mathematical sums, and we can talk politics, finances, but not fixing your car. Not unless you want it worse off than when it began. So, but yeah. Well, so thanks again for coming on and joining us. And as I say, one of the things I like to say on this podcast too is that part of the reason we're here is because the mainstream media and really all of the institutions in our society, by and large, have abandoned truth. And but the mainstream media is not telling the truth. They're not informing the people. And like the other institutions is part of your story, but we'll get there later. But like, I wanted to have you come on to kind of share with us like who you are, where you come from, like how you engaged in politics, and just some of the rest of your story, because I think I think there's like a lot of encouragement to be found, and also I think your courage, and we'll get to this part a bit later, your courage and kind of standing up for what you believe, in the current environment, especially at the college and other places, I think is pretty awesome. But yeah, so like let's start, and you just kind of tell us who you are and kind of some of the things that you've gone through your history, if that makes sense.
So I grew up in Sydney, Maine, which is a very, very small town in between Augusta and Waterville. And starting, I'd like to say at 8 or 9, I've been doing things like pro-life rallies and speaking for different gun bills. My mother has always been in politics my entire life. She was a selectman of Sydney until I was probably 15 or 16, and has been the president of Gun Owners of Maine for quite some time now. So I've always been around politics, in politics, spent a lot of time in Augusta. I'm very familiar with everybody in that circle. I was very deeply immersed since a young age. I think my first volunteer spot was putting stickers on water bottles for Bruce Poliquin. My sister tells that story all the time. And now in early life, I loved it. My pro-life activism through First Choice Pregnancy Center was my favorite. I've always loved talking about babies and fighting against abortion. And that was pretty much my life until I was 14 or 15. I entered public school and hit a lower point in my life. And I was still passionate about politics. My classmates to this day call me a loudmouth. Got into a lot of trouble in that area at school at Messalonsky, and started going down kind of a darker road, went away from politics, was still very vocal about it, switched out of Messalonsky to a charter school where, again, came the classmates that to this day at our recent gathering of a few of us that graduated together, one of them said that I was always a loudmouth and everybody knew what was on my mind and what I believed, and would often get into debates with other students at school. I had a friend who would not be as open about what he believed in general, but he was typical white conservative redneck boy and got picked on a lot by the
Mm.
LGBTQ students, and that was one thing that I was always super solid on, of you need to treat us all fairly, whether we're conservative or liberal or whatnot, because they would often pick at him, but the second that he snapped back at them, he would be the one in trouble. And that was pretty much as far as I went in that age group. I wandered away from the entire world, from my family, from my faith, from everything I believed in. And by age 18, had been a pretty severe alcoholic, unknown by my family. I moved away. Well, unknown by my family, I had been vaping and doing all the typical teenage stuff at that point. Moved out of the house pretty much the month after I turned 18 to live with a boyfriend, and was just completely off the rails for about a year and a half, and came to Bangor to be in the Calvary Residential Discipleship Program, which is a biblical discipleship program that takes in ladies who are struggling with these things and gives us a firm foundation in Christ, and um, really gives us the life skills that we're clearly lacking, and helps us get together everything. And leading up to that, I had really noticed that my life was a mess, and I had wandered away from everything I was raised on, and said, Jesus, if you can take this messy life and do something with it, then you can have it. That's fine.
Mm.
Um, and I went away from politics because outside of that alcoholism, teenage rage type situation, that's all I knew. So I
Mm.
obsessed over it. So coming into the program, I thought, okay, maybe that's not healthy. Maybe I shouldn't go into that. So I was praying about it for a long time. And at the end of the program, I had decided to go back to college, which I had dropped out of twice beforehand due to a bunch of other things. And when I came to this summer class run by a professor, the head of the English department, we had two essays to do. And my first essay I wrote was about the importance in following Christ. It was a persuasive introduction saying he is the ultimate fulfillment, and this is what society's missing, is a relationship with Jesus Christ. And we've wandered away from that as a nation. And she didn't have a problem with that one. But the second one we had was supposed to be an opinion piece about anything that we were passionate about, was the criteria. And so I wrote on the upcoming red flag ballot question. 'Cause my mother's the head of that committee, and I myself very firmly believe that it is terrible law for Maine. It would allow anyone to say that you or a neighbor or anybody could say, I believe that that person is a danger to themselves or others, and their firearms would be removed without due process. So I wrote against that. And I was, in return, got a scathing response saying that I was a terrible person, I was a hypocrite, cared more about guns than people, whole 9 yards. And I believe that with the confidence that she did this, she'd probably done it to other students before and gotten away with it. And
Mm.
she realized very quickly she was messing with the wrong kid. My mom involved the NRA. We got it on the news. Said, this is ridiculous. Conservative students should not be discriminated against. We have all these precautions for discriminating against LGBTQ and all that other stuff. No matter what your political beliefs are, it should not affect your grades. So I can't officially say she's been fired, but you can. She's not offering any more classes at EMCC. I do know that. And following that, that's when I really felt like the Lord was putting me back into politics. So since then, we've started Penobscot Turning Point chapter at Calvary Chapel, Bangor, and I've been involved as much as I can with the Robert Wessels governor campaign. I do a lot of things from my mom with Keep Maine Safe against red flag laws, and am considering a position, or they're considering me for a position on the LePage campaign coming up for when he runs for Congress, right? Congress?
Yeah, CD2. Yeah, Congress and CD2 against Jared Golden.
Oh, well, then vote for Paula Page because I am sick and tired of Jared Golden.
Yeah, who
Yeah.
Jared Golden actually has to first get out of the primary because he's going to be going up. I guess is it Matt Dunlap? I think is his name, Matthew Dunlap, the former. If I'm right about that, the former Secretary of State. I have to get the name to verify, but anyway, he's got a primary. He's got a primary challenger, and I'm pretty sure that's who it is. The current state auditor, and then whoever wins that will go against LePage. So you have an opportunity to work on the LePage campaign, though, potentially.
Potentially, I haven't gotten any confirmation. I was invited to a volunteer Christmas party where we'd talk more about it, but there hasn't been any confirmation on that. I would love to do it. I don't want to say known, but have been involved with Paul LePage's campaign since his first governor campaign, or first or second, when I was little.
Yep.
My mom was on his volunteer, whatever she did. Again, I was very young, and we did stuff like that. I made one of those loom bracelets for his wife because I thought it was awesome. But that's my story in less than 10 minutes.
In less than 10 minutes. Well, there you go. Well, no, I think it's a great kind of synopsis of kind of what you've gone through in life. What's interesting, I noticed, and I'm just curious if you would kind of would equate this, because it sounds like you started to have some problems once you started going to the public school. Do you think it's directly related to the public school? Is that kind of what precipitated it, or were you maybe going to have some challenges anyway? Just, I don't know, but yeah, I guess that's the question.
I guess we can't know what would have happened if I hadn't gone to public school.
Right.
I know that it wasn't helpful. I got into a crowd of the wrong friends. Was a big thing. The wrong friends that had older friends that would buy us things that we shouldn't have had.
Right.
I think I was hurting anyway. My parents were in the middle of their divorce, so it was already kind of a rocky time anyway. But then that introduction of just worldly things that I hadn't been, I mean, I'd been exposed to through older cousins and aunts and uncles, whatever. Everybody's got those family members, but I was like in it 8 hours a day, away from my parents for 8 hours a day until, I had a bad boyfriend, like all that fun stuff. I think that public school does not do an adequate job of shielding kids from that environment, but also public school was a mess, and I was starting to doubt everything about my political views, my faith, because they teach you in high school that you're just descended from apes. What is that going to tell you? And I never bought into that, but I could feel the effects of it, everybody else around me buying into it. And it was just a miserable place to be in public school.
Yeah, well, there's definitely public school, especially high school. I think there's a lot of problems. Obviously, one of the things that we talk about as conservatives are all the problems that we see in the public schools. So it's one of the things that we know that we need to fix. Obviously, we're in terms of set aside the social element, which I think is probably one of the worst aspects of the public school system, in my opinion, which is interesting because a lot of people are like, oh, you got to send your kids to public school because otherwise, they won't know how to socialize. And it's like, you go to public school and you're like, they don't know how to socialize, right? What's interesting is I was talking to some kids because I work with kids in my I think kids, young adults at my church, and I asked them if they felt uncomfortable talking to people from different generations, because I think that one of the things that we see within the church is older people I think are uncomfortable talking to teenagers and young adults to some degree, and then young adults I feel like, or maybe I'm wrong about this, are uncomfortable talking to the older generations. And they were like, no, that's not our problem. Our problem is talking to our own generation. And I think that is really interesting, an interesting thing. And I think it has to do with that incredible breakdown and just kind of the weird stuff that happens in the public school system. but yeah, I mean, but aside from the social element, right? Like educationally, our schools are failing. But on top of that, there is that element where like the culture that exists within the school is not a good culture, right?
No,
Like,
it's
would
very
you
toxic. And I
like?
can hit on all three of those points. One thing I like to point out to people is the GOP communications director. My sister was homeschooled a lot more than I was. She is a significantly better communicator than I am, just as a personal anecdote. And also, it's true. Like, I see these kids who grew up in public school their whole lives who don't know how to have a face to face conversation. I get comments from older adults saying that I communicate really well just by being able to talk to a lady at my eye doctor, like things like that. And I would say I don't know how to communicate with my generation just because the lingo that they have is so much different than because I had a lot of older influences in my life. I was in my mom's in the GOP. That is a very much an older crowd.
Yeah,
And that's what I grew up with, so what I'm used to. And a lot of these slangs and things, I guess I don't typically understand, so can be a little weird. And but yeah, and it's not a formal conversation though. Like people
right.
kids don't know how to interact professionally or do anything like that, which kind of scares me. Academically, significant, especially since the establishment of Common Core in our state. Our academic levels have gone down so much. And personally, what I've seen is I've trained two girls at my job. I work at Dunkin' Donuts when I'm not doing politics. I've trained two girls that don't know what different coins are and can't give back change. And they're
Wow.
high school graduates, and one of them's in college.
So they've graduated from high school and they don't know. You had to tell them like what the difference was between like what a quarter, a dime,
A
nickel, and
dime,
a
yeah.
penny. It was a dime. It was a dime. Okay.
And I was like, and they won't touch the quarters. They only use dimes.
What?
I don't know. They won't touch the quarters. They only use the dimes. And I'm not even when I talk about it with my boss, I feel bad because clearly if it's I'm not the only employer or trainer that reports this either. Um from I've like even heard in my own circles. I know someone who works at TJ Maxx that sees it all the time. Kids will just hand you a handful of change and they don't even know what's in their hand. Um
Yeah.
because and it's such a so it's obviously just such a systemic failure of teaching kids basic math and life skills and just trying to hit their test grades with rote memorization and all that crazy stuff. Um,
If they're even doing that, I don't know. You were
either.
in the education
Yeah,
system, and
our test grades aren't great in our public school systems in Maine either.
yeah, no, they're horrible. Yeah.
And there was a third. I don't remember what the third point was, but
Yeah, I don't remember. There is an interesting to kind of go back to what you're talking about, and I think I think one of the things that I don't remember if I said this since we've been on the podcast or if this was what we were talking about before we went live, but like one of the problems in our society, right? Like we need better policy. Part of the problem is policy, but part of the problem is also cultural, right?
mhm.
And policy can help improve culture. And I'll use an example, right? Like, so one of the things that's destroyed the African American community, but also the poor white community in our country is like the welfare state, and
Mhm.
how like you give better benefits. I mean, I know of couples, and I don't know if they're still together, but I knew that there were couples back years ago. I was working on some things who were living together, had four kids together, but they remained unmarried because if they got married officially, they would lose benefits, right? And so we have structures in our society that are as part of the welfare system that are discouraging things that are actually healthy. Right. And I think that that's an example of a policy that created a social problem. So I think there are policies that we can put into place that will kind of work the other direction, right? Which is what we want to do, or we eliminate policies that create problems. However, at the same time, like we actually the cultural problem is something that needs to be addressed. at this point, and I don't think policy does enough, if that makes sense. And so I think when we look at what's going on, we need something more, and I think that's where faith comes in, right? And
Mhm.
there's, speaking of faith, like going back to like what you were talking about in school, there's this and kind of what happened. You got around the wrong crowd, right? There's this passage. I can't remember where it is. I think it's in Corinthians or something, or
Oh,
Romans. Bad character corrupts good morals, I think is
yeah,
the
bad company corrupts good morals. I think it's a Proverbs.
it might be, but I actually think it's in one of the epistles in the New Testament. But either way,
It
and
might yeah.
maybe they were
Paul was
quoting.
known to go back and quote
That's
all the
very, very, very true. So like, so there's this reality, but like, obviously other problems that were happening, but what's, what pulled you out of all of that, and what gives you the strength, to carry on is, I think you said, your faith, right?
my faith 100%. As I said before we went live, my faith is the base of who I am. Without my faith, I would not be where I am. Okay, well, without my faith, I'd probably be dead because that's usually what happens to kids that start out down that path. Is most of us end up chronically in that situation or dead. Like that's the reality. And the hope that I had to get out of that was just I had no hope. So I basically pulled back into when I did and said, Jesus, if you can do anything with this broken life, you can have it. And I've seen myself going from, hopeless, suicidal, couch hopping, living in my car to like I have a home, I have a full relationship with my family. I have a voice in Maine politics. I have um, a strong church family that I love. I go to church almost every night. Um, and like so many blessings that came of just saying, I'm sorry for everything that I've done. I know I'm a sinner. Can you please take my life and fix it and do something with it? Um, and so even just the few conversations that I've had at school with kids that either were Christian and kind of hesitate on it now, or straight up atheists who after talking to me are kind of like, oh, maybe you're not all wrong. Those things make everything so worth it. And um, a story that I don't often tell because it's a little weird, but after I figured out that my mom was going to go like to the news stations with what happened at EMCC, I was terrified because I hadn't been in politics for like a year and a half at that point, was not used to being in the public eye, was not didn't I just didn't know what would happen next. Like for about a year and a half at that point, being in the Blessed Hope program, I always knew what was coming next. And at that point, I didn't know what I was going to do or how that was going to pan out. And I fronted this like confident, we got this type of attitude, but I was petrified and ended up praying and crying in my college bathroom floor. Like, what am I supposed to do? And then went to do my devotions for that day because I had slept in and didn't do them that morning. And it was Acts 5 something, where after the Pharisees had told Peter and the apostles that they couldn't share their faith anymore, they said, we must obey God rather than men. And that was just the hope came a little bit later, but that was like, okay, this is what the Lord's telling you to do. This is what needs to happen. And then a few days later, reading about when Peter walked on water, and the Lord said, oh, you have little faith. And I said, what am I so worried about? I've got the creator of the universe in my boat. Uh,
Mm.
and that brought out a hope and an impact that I was going to say the name Jesus in every single interview that I did, everybody that I talked to, revert it back to that. with the utmost confidence that it was going to go through, because I knew that if I am in the Lord's will, there's nothing that man can do to prohibit that. Yeah. And just is a hope for my day-to-day life. I look forward to reading my Bible every night, and it is what keeps me going through my days. There's always that one verse that I need exactly at the end of the day, whether it's been a rough day or I'm trying to make a decision about my relationships or my job choices. There's always something from the Lord that guides me to my next step.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I mean, the reason I'm in politics, so I've told this story probably a number of times. Some people probably remember, but God brought somebody into my life for a brief period of time. He had come over, from another country, and we were just talking, and I was just like, kind of, one, because I knew that he was a Christian, and the world's crazy here, and I'm just sharing with him like what's going on in the world, and he starts saying, and basically I was trying to like remain as like, here's what some people think on this side, here's what people think on that side, here's kind of where I land on this issue, but I was just kind of, again, letting him know the landscape that exists here. And he started saying, like, after a few days, like, you need to get involved in politics. And I was like, no, I'm not interested, and eventually, like, he stayed with me for about 2 weeks, and at the end of the 2 weeks, he said, "You are getting involved in politics," and I was like, "Okay, this is weird," because like and I talked to him since, and he wasn't trying to be prophetic; he was just describing what he saw happening. But for me, it was like the change in like "you should" to "you are" was like, maybe God is saying something to me here, and I need to listen, and once I opened my mind to the possibility, every door opened, and people who are Democrats, for instance, and very strong, like, who had previously been arguing with me the merits of socialism, which I was not buying into. For the record, I do not believe in socialism or communism. Capitalism works, so socialism does not. That's the short version. But for more, watch my interview with Representative Rafael Macias, where he outlines socialistic ideology and I counter. Anyway, that was actually a fun interview. But anyway, but a number of people who are like on the other side of the aisle were like really excited that I was going to get involved in politics. Maybe less so today, but at the time they were. And so, like, anyway, like, everybody was like, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea. You should." And so, like, I was like, "Okay, well, the doors are opening. This is where I got to go." But it's ultimately my faith that drives me, which I think is why so many of us. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about this from your perspective, because I don't think we've talked about it. Is like, that was, I think, one of the most profound things about Charlie Kirk being assassinated was, like, if we think about why he was assassinated, and he first and foremost was drawn into this because of his faith. It's his relationship with Jesus, which is what motivated him to engage in politics and speak the truth in the public sector, which is ultimately what got him killed. And so the question, the thing that I think a lot of people are talking about now is part of why this hit so many people so deeply is because he was just saying the things that I believe. And so if again, I don't agree with him on absolutely everything, but the vast majority of things, right, he was just saying the things that I believe, and people are celebrating, like, and he was killed for it, and people are celebrating his death. And so that's the piece that's like, just like, that was really like, boom. I don't know if you thought a lot about that, but
I thought a lot about it. About just a few months into me being the program, my pastor's wife suggested that I should start a Turning Point chapter because I had previously been involved with the Kennebec County um, activism hub. And I was obviously hesitant at first, but here we are a year and a half later, and we have a pretty successful Penobscot Turning Point chapter. And it was already in the works, and we were planning our first meeting for just a little less than a week after Charlie died. And I had always loved Turning Point, but I didn't know who Charlie Kirk really was until after he died, I went back and I had seen quite a few of his videos. You know, my sister shared some with me, and I watched a lot of his videos, especially the ones where he ends up passionately and tearfully arguing with someone, urging them to go to follow Christ, because he had such a heart for the unbeliever, to really just have that down to earth conversation of, this is what I believe and why I believe it. Let's talk about why we disagree, but also I care enough about your soul to say that Jesus is the only way. And that really hit me. So I used my Turning Point chapter, which our first meeting had 55 kids, to
Wow.
really go into the original starting point of Turning Point, where he saw that there wasn't a place for the Christian conservative on campuses, and how much of a heart he had for the Lord and doing what he did. And that's what, it wasn't a political murder, it was a martyrdom. It was an American martyr, who
Mhm.
died for his faith, and they couldn't debate him, so they killed him. And standing for his faith, and people celebrate that because Christ convicts them on their all their sins,
Yeah.
and really feels like uh, uncomfortable. They say, he said, "You call me teacher, and our student isn't better than teacher," or something, saying that we will be hated too because we follow him.
Yeah, they
And
hated me and they're also gonna hate you. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and that celebration of his death really just brings that to light, and really should give every Christian an inspiration to keep fighting no matter what pushback that you get. Because Charlie died doing that. And
Mm.
Christ says we will be rewarded in heaven for that, and be counted. I want to be more like Christ, and Christ got persecuted to death.
Literally. Yeah, he was you could actually make the argument that Jesus was both one and the same. He was a political and a religious figure that
Mhm.
was killed literally for speaking truth, right? That's
He
why
pushed back against the Pharisees.
yeah, and their authority was challenged, and they wwere concerned for their political position,
Mhm.
their spiritual authority or whatever, which was the same thing in that society, and so they had him, they killed him, and what's interesting when you talk about Charlie Kirk being a martyr, and obviously I think people who are watching this are probably mostly on our side of the aisle, but like there are a lot of people that are like pushing back against that and are saying maybe we need, are you changing the definition of what a martyr is, because like Charlie wasn't specifically in that moment speaking the gospel and being killed for that. However, what's really interesting, I was thinking about this recently because I was talking with somebody, and you have Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right? Dietrich Bonhoeffer is like I'm reading, Eric Metaxas wrote a biography on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, which so far is fantastic. I'm not that far into it. I need to be more dedicated to spending more time reading books, and spend less time, on the phone, social media, watching TV or whatever. But I'm working through that, and I find it really interesting that Bonhoeffer is referred to as a martyr, and I don't hear people complaining about that. And he's somebody who, yes, he was a Christian pastor, but he also attempted to like assassinate Adolf Hitler. So anyway, I just think it's kind of an interesting thing. But it really was the outworking of Charlie Kirk's faith that led him to say the things
Mhm.
for which people chose to kill him. And so like people don't have to. And what's interesting is like there's there are so many people, I think, in the church that have been afraid. Allie Beth Stuckey recently did a really good podcast, kind of explaining a lot of the differences and how a lot of people in the church are like who are engaged in their faith, and wanting to think about politics. And like, there's basically the Tim Keller path and the Charlie Kirk path. I would encourage anybody to go watch that if they're kind of struggling with that, or if you know anybody who's struggling with that. Um, uh, but um, but anyway, but I think a lot of the church has fallen into either intelligently, intentionally, or accidentally fallen more into the like, well, we'll go ahead and vote, and we'll vote our values, but outside of that, we're not gonna involve ourselves in politics because it's icky. Whereas like I'm coming to the conclusion more and more that that is the exact opposite perspective that a Christian should have. Now, I'm not saying that every Christian needs to run for office. I'm not saying that every Christian needs to be involved in a political party, the political party, the Republican Party, whatever. That's not what I'm saying. But listen, the reality is that Christians are called to do difficult things. We're called to do. We're called to, go places where other people won't go, and go into the most difficult aspects of our society and do the right thing where other people won't do the right thing, if that makes sense. And so politics seems to me to be one of the most important, places in our world that a Christian should go, because like there's the implications of political policy have disastrous, if you've got the wrong people in power, you have disastrous impact on people. And if you care about people, which if you're a Christian, you do. Yes, we want to see people come to know Jesus. Absolutely, 100%. If you're out there and you want to know more, feel free to reach out to me. But we also care about people in the here and now. We care about the culture around us and the impacts of what's happening. We care about children being mutilated. We care about children being murdered in the womb, right? We care about elderly people being snuffed out, like what's happening in Canada, where people start to have depression and their doctors are trying to tell them, well, maybe you should kill yourself. And that's
suicide.
That's not this, and that's not like, I'm not being facetious there. They're literally, if you are experiencing, depression, one of the recommendations of the medical system in Canada is to kill yourself, through a medical process, not with a gun or anything like that, but more with, through like, I don't know, lethal injection. I have no idea.
Yeah, my mom left the medical system because they were going to be doing doctor-assisted suicide.
Yeah, I mean, and so like it's crazy what's happening in our society. And if you're a Christian and you care about people, how can you not engage in that? How can you not say, hey, this is where we're needed? Now, again, not everybody is going to get involved to the same degree. But I think that we have to be involved. We have to be engaged, because otherwise it's going to be left to people who are godless. Not everybody who's not a Christian is necessarily godless. You've got other religions, but ultimately, that's the reality. For the most part, is that like, if we're not doing it, who is? I think there was actually the Christian Civic League of Maine's been putting out some good content of late. And one of the quotes was, what is it? God is a lawgiver interested in righteous law. As Christians, we must stand for laws based on truth and righteousness, or who will. We can't sit back. We have to stay engaged and pray for righteousness. That's a segment from one of the pastors. I think it's Steve Christner, Calvary Baptist in Turner. And there's more. Check out their pages. But the reality is, like, if we're not engaged, who will be, right? And I think that Christians have believed a lie, that we shouldn't engage in politics. Number one, they've believed the silly lie, and I'm doing way too much talking and I'm interviewing you, but I'll shut up in a moment. But they believed the lie, that secularism, which is not the Bible, for the record, right? The Bible is the Bible, and then the Bible does not tell Christians that they should not engage in politics. In fact, instead, in a lot of ways, they didn't have a democratic society, but they did recommend that you engage in you have, well, what's the word? Anyway, my brain's not working, but there is an intentionality in using all the resources that God has given you, and for the sake of advancing his kingdom. And that includes politics. But so the Bible is not discouraging people from engaging in politics, nor does our Constitution say anything about separation of church and state. That's actually, like, again, letter by Thomas Jefferson to a church indicating that the church can't force them to do anything, right? Like giving them confidence against the government from restricting the church. But there's nothing that says that we can't try to pass laws that are in line with our belief system. In fact, like, obviously everybody is going to operate from their own belief system, and so that's something that we need to be engaged in doing, and we have a calling before God to, again, be good stewards of the resources God has given us. So anyway.
Well, that is a good point to bring up. Coincidentally, I had at my church, Ken Ham was hosted, who does Answers in Genesis and runs the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter. He's got a lot of really great books on that. And he drilled this fact into our heads that all of these political things that we're facing can all trace back to Genesis 1 through 11. Even things like sanctity of life, we are created in God's image. That pro-life view is given to us by the Lord, who cares about every living soul because we are all made in his image. Gay marriage is in Genesis 1 or 2 saying a man and a woman, and is referenced again in the New Testament quite a few times. And yeah, pretty much anything
And the
in the
gender
conservative
nonsense, right?
beliefs can be traced back to those very fundamental places in the Bible. And that's also why our society is so shaky, is because we've lost that Christian foundation. We've got this shaky, we're not even morality, really. It's basically saying there is no God, therefore I am God, and I decide what happens everywhere else, and then there's just chaos. And
Which
there's no
Which,
moral.
like you said, by the way, that's Genesis 3 for anybody who's wondering, right? Satan literally comes in as the serpent and
Mhm.
tries to subvert God's created order, and he challenges and he says, God doesn't want you to do this because he's trying to hide something from you. You can be like God, it says, knowing good and evil. And I think some people misunderstand that. Sorry for the Bible lesson for those who are just looking for politics today. But the what's being said there is not that Adam and Eve didn't know right and wrong before they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but you have to think about God's relationship to good and evil. He's in charge of it. Like he is in charge of everything. He's in control. He's sovereign over everything. So what is good and what is bad is completely determined by God and his character, right? And so what Satan was saying is you can be the judge of your own life and decide what is good and what is not good, right? That's what Satan was selling, and that's what he's still selling into our culture, and our churches are unfortunately in some cases buying into this, but it is not for our good. In fact, he knows what's best and we need to follow him, not us, because we're going to mess it up. We constantly do.
Exactly. And it's such an unstable reality because we are so prone to base things on our feelings, and that changes every 5 minutes. Like I'm a woman, I'll say it. I yesterday cried over a doctor's appointment changing. That's just the reality of the situation. We are not firm. We are don't have that absolute morality. Whereas when we follow the Bible, the basically the handbook of our lives, written by the one that created us, is when we find the most peace and fulfillment and everything like that. So, and I wouldn't apologize for the Bible lesson, because when you invite Catherine Parker on anything, you're going to get a lot more Jesus than you bargained for. I've told
Very
that
well.
to a few other interviewers, because that is, without that firm foundation of Christ, we have nothing to stand on. Um, Building your foundation on Christ is like the man that builds his house on the rock, versus the one that builds his house on shifting sand, because it is shifting. It never, secular beliefs and godlessness is never solid. It's never a supported foundation, whereas Christ is never changing and loves us because he created us. He created us to be loved and to love him back. And he wants what's best for us in everything.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. So one of the things that I also want to pick your brain while I've got you on here, right? Because I think like when Charlie Kirk was here, one of the things that he said, was that I think partly as a result of his ministry and his organization Turning Point and what they're doing, but I think there are other factors that play into this as well. But he said that young men are more conservative than they've been in 50 years, and then he said young women, work in progress. And so I think like one of the questions I have is like, you're an anomaly. It starts with a statement that you're an anomaly in our culture. You're a young woman who is conservative. Most young women are more likely to be liberal. What is it like? And I think there's a number of I think there's a primary reason, but like, what is it about like the I guess the Democrat Party? I was going to say feminism. It's the current brand of feminism, which somehow means that if you're a real woman, that means you're okay with a woman. Oh gosh, I get so confused with this stuff. But you would be happy to date a woman who thinks she's a man. Otherwise, you're a trans exclusionary radical feminist. Anyway, that's the turf feminists. But the current wave of insane I know it's hard to keep up with. But like, anyway, what is it like that has caused you to essentially, because you, like you said, you were in high school and you were challenged by everybody, and you didn't like the conservative, and you kind of questioned your conservatism, I guess, to a degree. Like, what is it about conservatism that is attractive for you as a woman over against what the Democrats are selling?
Oh, that's a whole new can of worms. I might say some things that are like even controversial on our side of the aisle too. I think that the majority of women my age gravitate towards feminism is a number of things. I think the two biggest things is we follow our feelings without a stable male figure or a reliance on God. We follow our feelings, and that's just a biological reality. And when God created us, He took the femininity, a lot of the emotion reliance out of man and made woman. And that is why it's such a beautiful thing for a man and a woman to be together, because we have such a great capacity to love and a great capacity to feel that love and all of the things that come with it, which is so questioned nowadays, saying that that's not how it works and men can be just as emotional as women and all that other fun stuff. But that's a whole other rabbit trail. Um,
Well,
and
if they're men who have a woman brain, I guess. I'm just kidding. This is the nonsense. But
okay.
anyway, continue on.
And fatherlessness, a lack of a stable male role model in the house leaves so many girls feeling unloved, feeling like
Mm.
there's fathers play such a crucial role in a young woman's life, um, in so many different ways, like showing them how men are supposed to act, showing them how they're supposed to be treated as a wife, showing them how they're supposed to be treated by society as a woman. And I have no problem if men want to do things for me, like fix my car, open doors, stuff like that, because it makes me feel appreciated. And so many women are convinced in society that that just means that they think that we're weak, and we're not weak. We go through childbirth. We feel emotions like 100 times more than men, and that's a hard thing to do. But physically, we have different strengths and things, and so many women have bought into the lie that that means that we're inferior, but we're not. We have different roles, but we are not. Um, we don't have less value than men. Like, that's such a misconception. And back to that fatherless portion, like, there's such a hole that's left when there's no father in the house, and unless you have God to fulfill that father role, then you're left with that void that you're just trying to fill with all these things. And like, LGBTQ girls, sorry to tell you, most of them have gone through sexual assault or fatherlessness or just a lack of stable male role models in the house, because they didn't get the love that they needed growing up,
Mm.
because we are built to receive that love. Um, and why I ended up, I think, being a conservative in, oh goodness gracious, my laptop's dying. That was brilliant. Being so How I ended up being conservative in a world full of girls that tend to lean more liberal. I'm sorry, this is
You're
professional.
totally fine. Take your time. I mean, I think you're nailing it so far. I love this. You're saying a lot of things that I'm not allowed to say. Um,
Say things that you're not allowed to say. I don't
I'm a
think I'm
man.
allowed to say them either.
Well, as a woman, you are. I'm the worst form of
Ah,
human.
as a woman, I'm
According,
allowed to say them.
right. As a woman, you'll be hated for it, but I'm already hated for everything because I'm a straight white male Christian landowner, landlord. So I think I'm the worst that you can be. But anyway, but like it's a myth, obviously, that men shouldn't be able to speak truth, even if they're not the ones that are the primary subject of that truth. But especially white men, it's like we can't talk about black people, we can't talk about women, we can't talk about. It's like,
Well,
well,
that's
if,
crazy.
if it's well, no, it's crazy. But anyway, I think you're doing a really great job. I think people hear it better from women who are the ones having to experience the world from the perspective of a woman. So anyway, but go ahead, continue. So the reason that you didn't, like so many others, I think, is where you were.
I think even though I had an element of everything I discussed, I mean, my dad's a great guy, but it was really rocky for a long time. And I think I did end up searching for that love that every girl wants, through bad boyfriends and all that crazy jazz. And I always knew what the truth was. I was raised so deeply in the truth and in conservative politics that I knew too many facts to go back on that. I
Mm.
really believe. And then
That's
just
the real quick. That's the biblical principle of train your children up in the way of the Lord, and when they're
mhm,
old, they will not depart from them. Yeah, I like that.
exact because I can't forget. Like, if extreme example, but if I were to question my pro life beliefs, I can't do that. I know every week stage of birth, I know that by week 10 that baby has everything that it needs to survive except for its size. Like, it's
Mm,
just such an incredible thing that I was able to learn and was exposed to as a kid that I can't forget that. um
mm,
and just, yeah, and just that truth that even if I wanted to doubt my beliefs, you've always got that little tick in the back of your head saying you know better. um
mm,
and also just, and again, I do believe that because girls are so heavy in their feelings, that's kind of why we're seeing this shift away from conservative values amongst young women. Is and what really kind of protected me from that, especially in the past few years, is just the the Lord filling that hole of needing to be loved. Um, and even though I kind of had to find and fall into that the hard way, I was just so grateful and fulfilled by that. And knowing that, and just being around kids all the time, and my boyfriend who I love, and we're talking about getting married, we're like, that traditional role, it doesn't seem demeaning at all to me. It seems like the best thing that I can do with my life. Um, it's like
Can I,
politics and Duncan to boot. I would be a stay-at-home mother any day of the week. Like,
what's really interesting? I think this is really a great. I love this, first of all. But I think, like, one of the interesting things about our society, and I just want to kind of lay this out because I think this is what I see happening. Right? Women are like it. Women in trying to prove that women are equal to men, they instead try to prove that women can do the same things as men, right? Which so like, let's talk about like equality of value versus equality of being able to do the same things, right? So like,
mhm,
what's interesting is, like, the people on the left absolutely would argue with anybody who would say that, let's say, a mentally challenged person, like a kid with Down syndrome or something like that, is less valuable than the president of the United States, especially right now. They wouldn't say that. The Down syndrome kid would be worth, according to them, much more valuable than the current president of the United States. But the idea is, like, the president of the United States has all the power, the most power of any person basically in the world, for the most part. Um, or at least one of the most powerful people, if not. I mean, the Supreme Court has a pretty substantial amount of power as well, those justices. But But anyway, like nobody on the left would say that that mentally challenged child is less valuable than than the president, simply because this child could never be president, right?
Unless
However,
before they're born and can be aborted.
correct. That's another nonsensical aspects of the left. But when it comes to things dealing with men and women, in order for their attempts to prove that women are equal to men is separate from equality of value and more focused on function. And
Mhm.
how they prove it is by women taking on the roles of men. So it's like, so there's this inherent within the feminist movement hatred of femininity.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah,
the
which
feminist
is
movement hates
anti-feminist in
women
itself,
and wants women to be men,
which we're not. And I know, I
right?
mean,
Like,
although I remember my older cousin, physically we are different. We just are. My older cousin, who's not that much older than me, once I told him when we were kids that I could kick his butt. So he just grabbed my shoulders and held on and said, "Okay, give it a shot." And I could barely move. Like physically we are different. We have different muscle mass, different genetics, different um everything. Like things that I'm a small woman, my boyfriend's 6'3". There's a lot of things that I ask him to do that I just can't do. Um, and that's fine. He can't give birth. He can't
correct.
I mean, if worse comes to worse, if he had to be a single dad, I'm sure he could. But there's just so many things that a mother gives a child that they can't receive from their father and vice versa. Um, and I think society's, like you said, looking at value versus power per se.
I think
Like,
function. It's like
yeah,
value versus function. So I think why this is so easy for us, right? I think to have that. I think first of all, there are some Christians that don't get this, and they just need to spend more time in the Word, and find somebody to be a good discipler of them. But like one of the things that makes this much easier for Christians is that we have a scenario within our Godhead, right? You
mhm,
have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. They're all one being. Like this is the Trinity. Sorry, everyone, this hurts the head. But they're all one being, but separate persons within that being. They're all co equal, co eternal. And yet we see a functional hierarchy, right? In fact, like the Holy Spirit gets the least play, right? The Holy Spirit is like, the Holy Spirit's primary objective is to point people to Jesus and God the Father, right? And
mhm.
and he's like not mentioned, and nearly as much as the others,
Well,
and yet they're co-equal and co-eternal. Like I just use that because sometimes they call him the bashful member of the Trinity. But anyway, but the point is, like, they have different roles. Functionally, where Jesus at one point says, I nobody knows the day or the hour, only the Father. I don't even know, right? Talking about the end times. And so, like, there's this functional hierarchy within the Godhead where Jesus is deferring to the Father, the Holy Spirit's deferring to Jesus, and like, and yet they're co-equal and co-eternal. So I think it's easier for us as Christians to understand, that those, like, that we're equal in value, but we have different functions in society.
I think, yeah, and I think that's also a for those who struggle with that kind of Trinity aspect, there's also back in Genesis where God makes Adam in his image. And then later on, when there was no helpmate suitable for Adam, um, the Lord put him to sleep, and then took half of, not just a rib, not just part of his flesh, but half of who Adam half of who man is, was taken out and made woman. And there was no difference in value. We're two halves of this image of God, and we just have different roles because we're the opposites of each other because we came from one whole. Um, and Eve was made to be a helper of Adam, and that's how I would see myself, as a helper of my husband, which we're not married yet. And just not as someone who's lesser than him in value um or in any way, just under him, yes, because I am a helper and man is a representation of Christ, and a wife is a representation of the church, of the bride of Christ. Um, and we have different roles and different ways of receiving love versus respect, or different reproductive roles, different life roles, body mass, all that stuff that I brought up earlier. But in the beginning, we're not he didn't make Adam and then as this image of God great being, and then made Eve out of the dust as some second rate whatever version of Adam. He took one whole image of God, one whole person, and separated the two into the man and the woman that we see.
Mm.
So that really puts an image of my mind of we're just opposites. Men and women are opposites. But we make one whole image of God, and no part of the image of God has any less value than the other.
Mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I think that's a great way to kind of explain it. I think what's interesting too is obviously it would be silly not to say that a big part of the reason that there's a lot of younger women who are not conservative is because they've bought into this lie, the kind of the feministic lie that we're talking about, which but that's also kind of what leads to the next bit, right? Is that there's also like an anti-child
Mhm.
idea. And when you talk about the image of God, I think you talk about the family, you're also talking about children, because one of the first things that was given was to be fruitful and multiply, right? And so there's this aspect of that's also how that's the other element I would say in how we image God is through the family, and through children. And our society has taught us to hate children like that. I mean, I literally know people who are like, I just don't like kids, and there's a lot of people like that. And if you're out there, okay, I mean, repent is what I would say. Children are incredible and wonderful, and gifts from God, and we need to be thankful for them, and we need more of them is the reality. But our society has taught us that no, you need more stuff. And so both parents need to work, and they also need to advance in their careers, and in fact their career is more important than their family, right? This is kind of which is interesting, in part because me as a man, when I think about my career, which right now I'm trying to figure out what that is. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm doing political stuff, and and I've got a business, and a number of other things going on. But when I think about like why I do those things, it's not because I'm just like, oh my gosh, I just love my career. It's like I want to be able to support my family. Right. That's why I do it. That's why I pursue it. And so like the idea that they're trying to push with women though is actually like screw the family, screw your kids, pursue your career, which is what leads them to why why abortion is they talk about women's rights. So because it's what's interesting for me, and I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this, but like it seems to me that the big selling point of the left for young women is that they stand for women's rights, and by that they mean the ability to terminate a pregnancy. And like, what else do they have to offer? Because they don't care about girls' sports and spaces, right?
No, that's a good point. And we've diminished the worth of children to unborn babies are just a clump of cells. Like
Mm.
there wouldn't be that. I had a debate with a girl recently where she talked about her brother. She was pro-abortion, talking about how her mother almost got an abortion because her brother was risking her own mother's health. And the first thing that I pointed out was, well, don't you love your brother? Can you imagine? I couldn't imagine a world like my brother drives me nuts sometimes, but he's my whole like that's my baby brother. That's a kid I'd go to jail for. Like you don't that he's I love my baby brother, and I really just wanted to tap into that big sister feeling of, hey, you love your brother. If he had been aborted, Eden would have never existed. You would have never had all these amazing things with that brother. And she was like, well, I guess we'll never know. And I thought that was a little crazy. And when we really think I've lost 2/3 of my generation are just gone to abortion.
Mm.
And we place so little value on life, on what is that brother of hers grown up to be, to do, to impact people? And that flow, and we sacrifice our children on the altar of convenience. On, well, I'm pregnant now, so I can't go on to college to be a career, to have a career, and had such this stigma on moms, on stay-at-home moms, on moms that even just
Well,
work part-time and
let's
be
just
home with
think about that.
children.
Let's just think about that for just a second. Like, I might have to sacrifice my career for a human being. Human being, like, I mean, college, right? My college degree, and I'm just like, what? Like, it seems like it's just it's so inherently like selfish, right? It's like, oh, I have this thing that I want to accomplish, and this human being is getting in my way. And it's like, this is much more powerful and beautiful and wonderful. Like, there are actually stories of like women who get themselves out of addiction
Mhm.
because of their baby, because like the ability to bring this beautiful child into the world and care for it is actually what leads them out of addiction.
Yep, I
um
know a few girls like that, actually.
yeah.
The lady that runs 40 Days for Life in my area was in a heavy addiction, broken life, and had her baby girl and chose life, and now she runs 40 Days for Life. She's an amazing mom. I love her to death. Um, so I've definitely heard a lot of those stories, and I think the biggest problem, which is what I was ramblingly trying to make, was just the diminished value we've placed on human life. Because
Yeah.
in in health class, we were taught that that baby is just a clump of cells. It's not alive yet. It's not viable yet. It doesn't feel pain, blah, 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 which I knew was a lie because I've had those stages memorized since I was 11 years old. I had an obsession with it. And we have, and if I don't think I'm going anywhere with an abortion debate, I stop the conversation and say, where do you believe life begins? And I've heard girls say, like, after birth, stuff like that. Or even, it's crazy how far forward, how people misunderstand the difference of life. And Maine allows abortion up to 40 weeks, too.
Yeah,
And
up until birth, for
yeah,
no, you don't have to have a reason.
yeah, which is horrifying.
Mm,
So, of course, if we grow up in the society that says that children aren't actually children, then of course, that's just the logical answer to, oh, this is an inconvenience to me. This is going to ruin my life, or whatever they're being told by adults, by their boyfriends, by the Planned Parenthood therapist, all that crap. Um, they, they're terrible. They will convince you to have an abortion every single time. Because they get more money for that than adoption services, but that's another rabbit trail. The
yeah, the
Yeah.
almighty dollar. It's interesting. I feel like the Democrat Party used to, they love to hate money and big corporations when it's convenient for them, but when it's Planned Parenthood and all these scientific companies that are using the parts of children to do experiments, and a big part of the push is actually to just, that's why they want to kill these babies, is so they can do scientific
Mhm.
experiments and they can sell off the parts.
Stem cells.
um yeah, yeah, that's the
Yeah,
one. Yeah, yeah. So
but
people can like look younger and get their nice injection.
yeah,
Uh,
and I can go on that about that
yeah.
for hours, but the one
Oh, maybe we'll have you come on to specifically dive into that at a later date. But go ahead, continue.
I
Yeah,
used to research that. I was on almost every single research paper I did in high school was on abortion or guns.
yeah.
Um, but yeah. And one example that people think is so extreme is the Holocaust. That
Mm,
is how Hitler managed to murder millions of people, is by convincing society that they had no value, that they were less human than white, blue-eyed, whatever their Aryan type was. But that is how you have mass genocide, is convincing the public that this specific type of person doesn't have any value and is less human. And
mm,
that's what the abortion industry does. Like, they tell you that this little baby is just a clump of cells, And I can tell you right now that from the moment of conception, that is an entirely different person with new, like an entirely new strand of DNA that will determine their life for the rest of their life. Like, you don't add DNA to a person. From the moment of conception, that unique strand of DNA is that entire person's life. And it's just so heartbreaking that you can take that and just diminish the value of it simply by convincing people that that's not a baby. And so many of these conversations I have with girls my age, they don't know. They just don't know um, that that's a baby. They genuinely believe that that is just a clump of cells, just a parasite. Oh my word, the amount of times I've heard the word parasite in the past few weeks is just insane.
Mm,
It's because society's just convinced them that this person has no worth, that it's not even a person. And
mm.
that's why it's so easy for girls in my generation to choose their career over something that they just think is part of their body. And it's
It,
just that lie that's been sold.
yeah. Well, I mean, again, there's so many levels of this. One is like only kind of valuing the wrong things. Like part of what I think happened is like I think there was a failure in men, right? I think we failed. Back years ago, and basically we looked down on the roles that women played in society, and we acted as though the role of bringing home the bacon was the important role. And because of that, like, and I think we demeaned women a little bit, right? But then you had during the wars, this is kind of like a progression. During World War II, when the men all went to fight and the women entered the workforce, I think the women, I think, gained some confidence, and I think there were some elements that were positive change, but ultimately they felt like, oh, I can do this too. So we looked down on women, and they also like society over time more and more rejected those kind of roles as being specifically for women. And we have this systemic societal problem where everybody kind of looks down on that. We look down on children. They're not as valuable. They get in the way. Those types of things, and it's a brokenness. And this is where, like, one of the things that we talk about a lot on this podcast these days is like how, again, we talked about this earlier today, I believe, which is that the solution to fixing our world is not only political, but it's social and societal and cultural. And we need to get back to a place where we value children,
Mhm.
right? Where children being around and making noise is not something we're like, oh, did somebody shut that kid up? But would be more like, oh, great, I'm so glad that kids are having fun and they're making noise, whatever. It's a little like distracting, but guess what? They're worth it. What we're being distracted from is not nearly as important as their life and them growing. And I think we need to return to a society that loves children and cares about children, rather than wants to keep them out of our way and kind of act as though they're going to destroy our lives. Where parents who actually raise kids and actually, there are bad parents out there, right? There are people that choose to do not take care of their kids appropriately, but ones who actually say, okay, I'm having kids now, I'm going to focus on doing everything that I can to raise my kid appropriately, and have that family focus. They're some of the most fulfilled people that you'll meet. Some of the happiest people that you'll meet. The Bible talks about, whether this is men or women, actually, the Bible talks about like having children is like arrows in your
Arrows in your sheath.
yeah. So like,
It's
but
from Psalms,
basically,
I think.
yeah. But it's this idea that it's like they're really valuable is the short version, right? They're really, it's something to be very, very proud of and happy about, and it leads to really positive things. But we've kind of decided that we hate children as a society and also hate femininity. And we're wondering why we are like one of the most depressed societies, and so many, especially what's one of the fun, interesting things. It's sad. It's not really fun, but it is kind of fun because you can say that the Democrats are mentally ill. But is the high number of people on the Democrat side, particularly young women who are on, all these medications and stuff like that are depressed, and their mental illness rates are so much higher than people on the right, and I think that's a perfect example showing, hey, your ideology isn't working for you either. It's not making you happy. They told you that if you hate femininity and try to act more, show that you can do the things that you think men do or whatever, that this is going to bring you happiness. In fact, they're less happy. Conservative women are much happier than than liberal women. Conservative men are much happier than liberal men.
That does bring in on Monday Voices of Truth. That
Yeah.
is going to be my main talking point is the experiences I had in high school with the LGBTQ crowd, where's these girls who were so convinced that being transgender was their go all be all, or whatever, however that phrase goes, and how I'm more as frustrating as it was, I got threatened with suspension for misgendering students on a constant basis. But one of my buddies got suspended for snapping at a transgender student. That I'm going to share his story a little bit on Monday. But I feel worse for the girls that have that experience because they are so convinced that the only way that they are going to be better and the only way they're convinced that they're going to be happy is if they go through all this transgender surgeries and hormones and all that crazy stuff that's just damaging their body even further. And why the depression and suicide is so high amongst that crowd is because their doctors, their therapists, their friends, sometimes their parents have convinced them this is the only way you're going to get better. But then they go through with it. And 3 or 4 years down the road, they're worse off than they started. They're hurting. Their hormones are all messed up. They're in pain all the time. They don't have any breasts anymore. They're got skin removed from their arms to make fake male genitalia, like all this crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And you've gone through all this trauma of mutilating your body and you're still not happy and you still have no purpose in life and you still don't know who you are or what you're doing in this world. No wonder the suicide rates are so high because society is convinced, and the same goes for feminism and all the other crazy abortion that convince you that this is the best way to go, that this is how you're going to be fulfilled and happy is if you murder your child so you can continue your career. But in the end, you're just broken as you were to begin with, and then some. So, and that is why they're so unfulfilled, is because society convinces you that this is the best way to go, and then you go there and it doesn't work. And you're convinced that that is the only option. Well, screw life, you know? At the end, I've heard so many detransitioners say, I almost committed suicide because my parents had convinced me that this was the best way to go and then it didn't work, so why continue living? Like, if it's never going to get any better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the problem with false promises, right? Like it's kind of like the similar idea. I went to a conference a number of years ago, and it's played out true in our society by a guy named Peter Jones, but basically was talking about how every utopia turns into dystopia. Because it's like it's not true, it's not real, and so like this is kind of a subset of that. But like when you look to something to be the solution to your life, but it actually it's anything. I mean, we would say like as Christians, right? There's a God-shaped hole in everybody's life, and we try to fill it with all these other things, but the only thing that fits is God. And so any of these other things eventually let you down and leave you feeling empty. But especially when you're dealing with like nonsensical things, even the beautiful wonder of a family, right? Even something as good as that, something that actually is in line with biblical truth and what actually really brings happiness. Even that, doing that without God is not, it will let you down, right? But especially if you're pursuing things that are completely against your nature, that you're trying to mutilate your body, you're murdering children that are naturally growing within you. Like there's a consequence for that. It's not going to bring about the what you need, which is why so many of them need to be medicated, in order to like be able to be okay. I could do an entire rant just on the medication element, but I will leave that alone. Um, but uh, it's the God knew how God created us. He knows how we ought to function. He made us male and female, to go back to Genesis 2, right? Actually, Genesis 1 it says that, but as well, but like man and woman, and not gender fluid was not one of the options. And we will be happiest when we live in line with the reality that he set up, and listen to him, because he created us. He knows how we function. We're like the clock trying to tell the clockmaker how we're supposed to work. Nope. So anyway, but yeah, no, this has been a great discussion, Kate. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. And this isn't necessarily where I thought things would go, but I think it's great. Before I think we should wrap up. Before we do that, like given the fact that your mother is ahead of gun owners of Maine, what do people need to do this November?
People this November need to get out and vote against the upcoming, what do they call it? Extreme Risk Protection Order. Because the reality of that situation is a red flag law is what they call it, the Extreme Risk Protection Order, but it's really just bringing red flag laws into Maine. And what red flag laws do is, let's say I get off this podcast in a huff and I'm mad at you, and I can say that you are a threat to yourself or others, and they will come and take away all your firearms.
I think there has to be some
Petition.
sort of a relation, but I don't know exactly what it
Nope.
is. But either way, oh no, okay. Okay, yeah. So they can either, which is just crazy, and without due process, as you said. I think you said
Without
earlier.
due process. So it gives a friend or a family member the right to petition law enforcement that you are a danger to yourself or others, and then law enforcement will come without due process and remove those firearms without a mental health evaluation. And you have to go to quite I don't know if I want to say extreme process, but a long and grueling process to get those rights back. And it doesn't do anything to prevent you from getting, even if you were a danger to yourself or others, it wouldn't give you any mental health care or ways to prevent you from getting another gun illegally or using a different weapon or anything like that. Or even just you have other guns at other locations. They don't know
Sure.
that.
Yep.
Things like that. Whereas in Maine, what we have right now is a yellow flag law, which would actually require the person to have a mental health evaluation. And if you're good, you're good. You can get off scot free as long as you can say, pass a physician or something. Yeah, pass a certain test to prove that you are safe. But if you are a danger to yourself or others, then you would be brought in to receive that mental health care, rather than just taking away your firearms. Like,
Yeah.
it's such red flag laws focus only on the guns, and yellow flag laws focus on the person.
Yep.
Is the shortest way of putting it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So no on two. That's what we want to do. No on two, and just for fun, we also think voter ID is a good thing. So yes on one,
Mm.
yes on one, no on two. Get out, do your part if you could. And actually, right, people can vote now. We have early voting has already started, so you can go to wherever your city hall, or figure it out for your own municipality. But like, I know I keep driving by here in Westbrook, and I keep seeing vote here today. So you can vote now. And, I think we as conservatives generally tend to be people who don't want to vote early. But then there are a lot of stories where something happens, and they end up not being called out of town for something, and they don't get around to voting. So let's just be sure. I would just make sure, let's bank those votes, get there, vote, yes on one, no on two. And let's make our state safer, both by protecting our elections and by making sure that we don't enact unsafe red flag laws. All right. Well, if anybody is in the, I'm glad that you brought up Voices of Truth. So that, like, you go to Parental Rights and Education, I believe you're going to be able to find flyers on that. But Monday, October 13th,
It's
I think,
upcoming Monday.
yeah. So check it out. It's going to be at the Elks Lodge in Augusta. And then the other thing that's worth mentioning is if you're in the Portland area, we are doing some civil discourse at Monument Square in downtown Portland in honor of Charlie Kirk. We're going to have microphones and invite people to come up to the mic, and have a discussion, have a debate. So check us out if you're in the area. Come support us. And let's honor good old Charlie Kirk for the wonderful human being that he was, and encouraging us, as he said. One of the things he often said when people asked him why he would go into those spaces and do that, and his response was, when we stop talking, that's when violence happens. So unfortunately, violence happened to him, but I think we need to keep the conversation going, because we need to have these conversations as a society, and so we've got to, in order to ensure that we don't have even more violence, right? So show up to that. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. I think I got a podcast coming up on my next one will be, I believe, on Tuesday. If I'm not mistaken, it will be with Colby, who is heads up a Turning Point. Actually, I think it's Club America, which is Turning Point for high school kids in York County. So come check us out when I interview him next Tuesday at 3. And we'll a lot of other fun stuff happening next week too. So we'll see you all back here next week. And thanks again, Kate. Any last words for the people at home?
Just, I think the most important message of all is that Christ died for you and loves you. And if you have any questions about that, reach out to a local pastor or Chuck or myself.
How do people find you?
Well, we do. Turning Point Penobscot itself has an Instagram page at Turning Point Penobscot. I don't run it. I have a group of teenagers that run it because I know nothing about social media. And they'll get you in contact with me. I'm on Facebook, Catherine Parker, and I'm pretty liberal about who has my phone number too. But I'm not.
Don't give that out here. But yeah, so those are the ways that you can reach out to her, and obviously, if you should know how to reach out to me at this point. So thank you again, Catherine. Thank you, everybody at home, and we'll see you back here next week.